Dora was a young girl of 22. All her 22 years she lived in the village, first under the care of her parents, and then, when they were gone, under the care of her grandmother, Alevtina. Dora's parents passed away early in life. First, her father, who worked in the local sawmill, died. Then, her mother drank herself to death with grief and froze to death in the winter on the street. It was good that her grandmother, Alevtina, was still able to bring up Dora, despite the fact that it was hard for her alone. But barely after Dora finished high school and turned 18, her grandmother also left this world as a result of a long illness. Left all alone, the girl had no idea how to live her life. She had no money to continue her studies, and it was unrealistic to move elsewhere without money. In addition, Dora was a little afraid of city life. That's when her neighbor, Audra Gilbert, came to her rescue. She asked her daughter, the postmaster who lived in town, to get Dora a job. There was a catastrophic shortage of letter carriers, and Dora was immediately processed according to all the rules, and they even gave her a bicycle so she could ride around all the nearby villages. Since then, twice a week, Dora hung a heavy bag of newspapers and correspondence on her shoulder, got on her creaking bicycle, and rode out of town, heading for the surrounding villages. This day, she stopped at the store for water and was about to deliver the mail when suddenly a man's voice rang out behind her. "Miss, excuse me," someone said, and Dora turned around. Behind her stood some guy whose face was bruised. I'm embarrassed to ask, but the guy was wriggling from foot to foot and rubbing his baseball cap with his dirty fingers. "Do you have $2? I'd like to buy some food." Dora almost dropped her bicycle, and the stranger helped her hold it up. "Don't be frightened." The stranger tried to smile. And when his cracked lips turned into a smile, Dora noticed the guy was missing 2 front teeth. "I'm not some drunk. I was just robbed." The last phrase the stranger had uttered with such genuine trepidation that Dora felt uneasy. She took out her purse, dug around in it, and took out some money. "Here," she said, holding out 2 bills to the man. "Here you go." The man bowed and accepted the money and slipped them into the pocket of his crumpled jacket. "Have you been beaten? Maybe you should call an ambulance," Dora asked him. "Or the police. Didn't you go to the police?" The boy grinned and shook his head. "Who needs me?" he said. "You know how many guys like me there are? They won't look into it." The stranger bowed again, folding his palms together, and walked in the opposite direction, limping on his left leg. "Wait," Dora shouted after him. "Slow down." The man turned around, stood for a moment, and then went toward her. "Your face is all bruised, and there's an abrasion on your forehead," Dora said as the man came closer. "You must have a concussion. Would you like me to accompany you to the hospital?" The man threw his hands up. "I don't have any documents." He shook his head. "Who will see me without one? And no insurance card." Dora bit her lip. "Maybe," she suggested, "let's go to my place." The stranger asked where she lived, and when Dora told him that her house was 8 kilometers away, he whistled mockingly. "We'll ride a bicycle." Dora found a way out. One at a time. It would be way easier that way. The man nodded after a moment. "Okay," he agreed. "Let's go." On the way to the village, the stranger told Dora what happened to him in town. It turned out that his name was Milo, and that he had recently come here to work. He was looking for a job as a driver in the city and had already found a suitable place, when the night before he had been attacked, beaten, and robbed. "When I woke up, I found that my bag had been stolen," Milo said bitterly. "Okay, they took the money. I don't care. But my documents were in the bag. Why on earth would they want my papers?" Dora looked at him with sympathy and regret. "My neighbor's brother works for the police," she remembered. "I'll have to ask him to help. Don't worry about it. It'll all work out." Dora smiled at Milo and he smiled back, feeling her support. Soon, they were next to Dora's house. "Well, here we are," Dora said, with a sigh of relief, and pushed the gate of her house open. Milo followed her into the house, sat down on the old creaky sofa, and stretched out his legs. "Cozy," he said, looking around. "How old is this house?" Dora shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know," she replied, handing Milo an ice pack and a headache pill. "My grandmother said she got this house from her parents, and her parents got it from some other people." Milo put the ice on his broken forehead and closed his eyes. "I won't stay long," he said. "I'll be back in town for a little while." Dora hurried to reassure him and told him he could stay as long as he wanted. If she had known then that her words would be prophetic. Milo stayed with Dora for a month. He recovered his lost papers, borrowed some money from Dora, and even managed to get a job. He was lucky. The driver's job offered by the building materials store was still available. "What would I do without you?" Milo said to Dora when all the bureaucratic procedures were behind him. "And really, what would I have done if I hadn't met you then? I probably would have disappeared." Dora just smiled back. "Don't give it any cosmic significance," she joked. "It was just a coincidence. If it hadn't been for me, someone else would have helped you. There are good people in the world." Milo shook his head. "I don't think so," he objected. "Perhaps it is fate after all." He came close to Dora and kissed her. This unexpected action made Dora dizzy and almost fall over, but Milo wrapped his arms around her and held her close to him. 2 weeks later, Milo asked Dora to marry him, and she briefly agreed to become his wife. They had a small wedding, which surprisingly turned out to be too noisy for such a small village, and Dora's life went back to normal. One day in the middle of summer, when the girl was going to work, she suddenly felt violently nauseous. She went to her husband and told him that she was sick. "You're pregnant," Milo guessed. Dora almost bit her tongue. She slowly turned to her husband and saw his grinning face. Yes, he repeated. "Pregnant. Well, you know, that's what happens when people get married." Dora wanted to laugh at his joke, but a new attack of nausea prevented her from doing so, and she just took her head and ran to the bathroom. "Stay home tonight," Milo told her. "Lie down for a while, get some rest, and tomorrow I'll take you to the clinic myself." He put on his jacket, kissed Dora, and went to work. Milo was right. The ultrasound confirmed Dora's pregnancy. As time went on, the belly grew. Each day it became harder and harder for Dora to move around, and she was waiting to give birth while at home. The mailman's bag was gathering dust on a hook, and Dora had no idea when she would fill it again with mail and hang it on her shoulder. There was nothing to think about work now. "That's all right, I'll work tomorrow," Milo reassured her. "And your duty is to think about the baby." And Dora did, because there was nothing else for her to do. A warm but snowy winter passed, and spring returned to the village. Dora watched anxiously as the road filled with meltwater each day and wanted only one thing, that the floods would not interfere with her childbirth. She shared her fears with her husband, but he only waved his hand. "I'll take you away in my truck," he said. "It can fit through anything." So, on the first day of April, when Dora went into labor, Milo gently carried her in the company car and drove to the hospital. "Lucky," Milo said, driving carefully along the flooded forest road. "I had a feeling to drive the car up to the house." He turned to his wife, and when he saw her curled up on the back seat, he gave the gas. Milo paced the waiting room, nervously shuffling his boots across the smooth floor and biting his nails. From the far end of the corridor came screams, the screams of his wife who was in the throes of giving birth to their child. Milo was suddenly terrified. Could he raise the child, give him what he needed, make a real person out of him? "Your wife is having triplets," Milo was informed by the flushed midwife as he dozed off, curled up in the corner. "All 3 are boys. A miracle, that's all." Milo sat for a few minutes, batting his eyes. "Could I see them?" He finally found the strength to ask. The midwife shook her head in disapproval. "They are asleep," she protested. "And your wife too. She is tired, poor thing. A very difficult birth. You must be tired too, eh? Go home and come back tomorrow." The midwife smiled at Milo, whispered something last, and skulked off down the corridor. Milo looked at her, got out of his chair, and staggered toward the exit. "Triplets, triplets, triplets." The midwife's words rumbled in his head. Not 1, but 3 whole babies. Do you have enough love and care for all of them? Milo asked himself. Do you have enough understanding? He didn't know the answer. 10 days later, Dora was discharged from the hospital. Milo brought her home and sat for a long time watching Dora babysit and put the babies to bed. "Trouble with one," Dora said, rubbing the legs of one baby, a chubby pink boy. "His legs don't feel anything. We should take him to the doctor." Milo covered his face with his hands and sat silent for a long time, so that Dora was even frightened. "What is wrong with you?" she asked. "You look strange. I don't recognize you." Milo looked at her with a mournful look and a forced smile. "Tired, I guess," he said. I've been on pins and needles these days." Milo got up and left the house without looking at his wife and children. For several weeks, Dora watched anxiously as Milo became more and more withdrawn, silent and sullen. To all her inquiries, he would only smile strangely and guffaw, and then his face would again be covered by a mask of a kind universal annoy. And Dora did not know how to help her husband get rid of it. "I went with Trevor to the doctor," she decided one evening to lighten the mood. "He said that the prognosis is good, but Trevor needs a foot massage. It is expensive, really." She looked at her husband questioningly, but he didn't show any emotion. "I have no money," he said. "I work a lot and I don't have any money. I don't know what the hell it is." A week later, early one morning, while Dora and the children were peacefully sleeping after a sleepless night, Milo quietly gathered his things, carried them to the car, and drove away. Dora woke up and called out to her husband, but there was no answer. Soon, the house was filled with such screams that a neighbor, Audrey Gilbert, heard them in her kitchen. Dora rushed through the house, looking for her husband, screaming, crying, looking in every corner, but he was nowhere to be found. He was gone, leaving her alone. He had left his children. Why? For what? These questions tormented Dora, plunged into her brain and heart. She sank down to the bed, clawed her teeth into the pillow, and sobbed. She sobbed for a long time until the hungry children sobbed louder than she did. And Dora, pulling her face away from the drenched pillow, walked over to them. She looked at them and smiled sadly. "She'll make it. She's strong. Everything will be all right." Time passed, and Milo kept not coming back, not even making himself known. Dora had already come to terms with the fact that she would never see him again. It was hard, but she found the strength to throw his image from her memory like a faded photograph where nothing was legible. Trevor, Oliver, and Barry, as Dora called her sons, were growing day by day like spring grass. Barry and Oliver moved deftly across the floor, kicking and pushing with their arms and legs like frogs, and only Trevor hardly moved, preferring to lie in his crib and bat his huge blue eyes. Dora remembered with despair the doctor's recommendation for a massage, but could not carry it out because she didn't have any money. When the despair reached its extreme point in her soul, Dora herself began to massage her son's feet. But soon she realized that she had no idea how to do it properly. Then, Dora dropped her hands helplessly and cried, leaning over her son. As she came to terms with the idea that Trevor would never walk, one event occurred in her life that changed her destiny once and for all. It was a cold September day. Slanting rain whipped through the windows, and the wind pounded the roof with branches of an old tree. Dora sat near the children, knitting something. Sometimes she looked longingly out the window, hoping to see that the rain had stopped. But the rain poured on, knocking the yellow leaves off the trees in heavy drops. Fascinated by needlework, Dora did not notice how the evening came. And when it was completely dark, she turned on the nightlight and continued knitting. When Dora glanced at her watch and was surprised to see that when the hands showed 9:45, there was a knock at the gate of her house. Dora became alarmed. Who could it be at this hour and in this bad weather? She looked out the window, but the darkness made it impossible to see anything. The knocking repeated. It was quiet and measured. Dora waited some more, and when the knock came again, she slipped quietly out of the porch and came to the door. "Who is it?" she asked, without going into the courtyard. "I'm sorry to disturb you," said a husky voice from the street. "I'm lost in the woods and I need help. Open up for God's sake." Dora turned into one big ball of nerves. What if whoever is standing at the gate is lying? What if it's a burglar and he's not there alone? Once she opened the gates, several men will burst in on her at once. Dora held her breath. "What is your name?" she asked for some reason. "Joel," said a hoarse voice, and then he coughed instantly. "Joel Foster." Dora stood in indecision for a long time, wondering what she should do. She wanted to walk off the porch into the house, lock the front door and shut the windows. Let whoever was standing outside understand that she didn't want visitors and leave. What if there really is a person who is in trouble? Is it okay to leave a person outside in this weather? The scales in Dora's soul swung toward the second option, and she took the hammer lying on the porch just in case and went out to the gate. As she unlocked it, an old man drenched to the eyeballs with the bag in his eyes burst into the courtyard. "I'm lost," he said, shaking off and wiping his wet face. I wandered through the woods for 2 days before I reached your village." He held out his bag to Dora, who saw that it was full of porcini mushrooms. "Let's go inside," said Dora. "But be quiet. Don't wake the children." Joel, shuffling his feet and trying not to squeak the floorboards, went into the house and sat down at the threshold. "How did you manage to get lost?" Dora asked the old man, handing him a mug of hot tea. "We have a cell phone reception here. If anything, you can call the rescuers." Joel sipped his tea and squeezed his eyes shut. "I don't have a phone," he replied. "What about relatives?" Dora interrogated. "Why did they let you go alone without a phone?" "I have no one," he answered after a long pause. "No one and nothing. No relatives, no phone, no home. I am homeless." He took off his jacket, spread it out on the floor, and lay down with his back to the wall. Sipping hot tea, Joel told Dora what had happened to him. It turned out that he had once been a doctor. He had a family and a child like so many others. "But then there was a fire," the old man said gloomily. "I was at work at the time, and when I got home, He coughed and stopped talking. "They were burned alive. Lily and Stephanie, my wife and daughter." Joel wandered his eyes around the room for a long time, as if searching for the right words. "And then, things went wrong for me too. So now, I sleep wherever I have to and wander here and there in search of sustenance." "You said you were a doctor?" Dora said timidly. "What kind of doctor?" The old man looked at her. "A chiropractor," he answered. "Yes, there was a time." Dora's heart jumped up. "So, you know how to massage?" Dora asked the old man, and he nodded. "I used to," he answered. "And why do you ask me?" Dora pulled Trevor out of the crib and jumped up to Joel. "Here," she said, showing the baby's legs to the old man. "The doctor said that in order for Trevor to start walking, he needs a massage." Joel carefully accepted the baby and asked Dora to turn on the light. "Yes," he said, examining Trevor's ankles. "The joints are a little deformed. How long has it been since he was born?" 5 months, answered Dora. "Almost 6. So there's a chance?" "There's always a chance," the old man replied. 5 months is not 5 years. The bones are still soft. So you help me, I'll help you." Joel gave Trevor to his mother and stood up. "You need a massage every day for at least a month. Can I stay at your place?" Dora nodded her head. Of course," she exclaimed. "You can have the back room, though the floor is a bit rotten and the room is windowless." Joel grinned. "The rotten floor doesn't bother me," he replied, "and I don't need windows at all." The old man had been giving little Trevor a foot massage for a whole hour every day for a month. Dora watched as his wrinkled hands deftly squeezed and unclenched the baby's feet, and her heart sank with happiness. Trevor lay silent during the procedures, not uttering a sound. And Joel chuckled slyly, looking at him. "Well, that's it," he said as he finished another session. "Now he'll walk for sure. That's for sure. What's more, he's going to run and jump. He might even be an athlete. Who knows?" Dora knelt down in front of the old man. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "God himself must have sent you to me." Joel lifted her head up and shook his hand. "I should thank you, Theodora," he said. "You sheltered me, an old beggar. It's not often you meet such a kind soul as you are." Theodora sobbed and took her son in her arms. "Stay with us," she asked Joel. "My neighbor's son Frank will be here soon. I'll ask him to fix the floor, and then we'll fix the stove. Will you stay?" The old man laughed. "I'll stay," he said. "Where else would I go?" A week later, when the first frost came, Frank arrived in the village. Dora met him as he came out of the forest and headed for his mother's house. When he saw Dora, the man looked at her for a few moments as if he had never seen her before, and then rushed to embrace her. "Dora," he whispered, "you've grown so much. I thought you were a little girl." "And you?" Dora grinned mockingly, patting him on the back. "You look like a bear." Frank laughed. "So, how are you doing here?" he asked, helping her carry the bucket of water. "You must have a family by now, right?" The smile disappeared from Dora's face, and she slowed down. "Come by sometime tonight," she said quietly. "I'll tell you all about it." Frank carried her bucket to the gate, rubbed Dora on the shoulder, and went to his mother. When he found out that her husband had left Dora and the children, he was very sad about it, not knowing how to comfort her. "Come on, Frank," Dora told him. "It's all gone and forgotten." Frank threw up his hands. "Yeah, there's nothing to say," he grumbled. "Well, if you need any help, don't hesitate to call." "And we need help," grinned the old man Joe, who was sitting next to him. "It wouldn't hurt to have the floor in the back room relaid before it gets cold." Frank nodded. "I'll do it," he promised. "I'll bring the tools from the city, and then we'll get started." On a Sunday afternoon, Joel and Frank got to work. They found floorboards in Dora's barn, sanded them down, and put them in place of the old rotten floorboards. "I see you like Theodora, don't you?" Joel said to Frank as Frank wielded a scrap nailer to tear up the old boards. "You wouldn't flirt. You go up to her and tell it like it is." "Yeah, it's embarrassing," Frank said. "I'm 10 years older than she is, and we haven't seen each other for a long time. I worked on the watch all the time." "It's uncomfortable to sleep on the ceiling," smiled the old man. "And this is a young thing, a common thing." Frank was embarrassed, and in order not to hear the old man, started up the chainsaw and began to saw a hard-set floorboard. Suddenly, the saw chin hit a nail, burst into sparks, and burst. "Oh crap," cursed Frank. "I'll go and change the chain, but don't move around too much or you'll fall through." He picked up the saw, yanked the chain from the tire, tossed it aside, and headed for the door. Joel, meanwhile, picked up a scrap nailer that was laying around and began to finish the job Frank had started. The old man panted for a long time, straining with the scrap nailer, but the board did not want to come out. When his strength failed him, Joel threw away the scrap nailer and stomped on the board with all his might. The board rattled and collapsed, dragging the old man down with it. The old man barely had time to grab hold of a nearby stepladder. He climbed it and laughed frightfully. "I almost broke my leg." The old man got down from the stepladder and walked over to the gaping hole in the floor. Joel took a flashlight from his pocket and directed the beam into the blackness of the cellar. There, among the old garbage, lay some faded old bag. The old man picked up a scrap nailer, slipped it through the opening, and picked up the bag with it. The bag was heavy, and the old man had to work hard to pull it out into the light. When he finally succeeded in pulling it out, the bag suddenly burst and gold coins spilled out of it. "What was that noise?" asked Frank, who had returned with the chainsaw. "I told you not to touch that board. What's the big deal, really?" He walked over to Joel sitting on the floor and could not believe his eyes. "Where did that come from?" Frank asked him. "Where did you get it?" "Here it was," the old man answered. "Look at all this money." He took out one coin and gave it to Frank. Frank looked at the coin from all sides and looked at the old man in surprise. "Real gold," he said admiringly. "You found the treasure." Joel took the coin from him, put it into a bag, and then tied it tightly and lifted it on his shoulders. "Let's go show Dora," he said. Theodora almost fainted when she saw the find. "What is it?" she muttered. "I lived my whole life on treasure and didn't know about it, and my parents and my grandmother too." She collapsed helplessly on the bed and clutched her forehead. "We must notify the police," she moaned. "According to the law, we have to give what we found to the state." Joel sat down beside her and put his hand on her knee. "According to the law," he began quietly. "According to the law, children should be treated for free too. According to the law, old people are entitled to housing. By law." He stopped talking and coughed. "So that's the way it is. The law can do without this gold. We'd better sell it piece by piece." Frank nodded. "Yes," he agreed. "It's better to do it this way. The state won't appreciate our generosity anyway." Joel transferred some of the coins into a tea box and handed it to Frank. "Sell this first." Frank tucked the box into his jacket pocket and tapped the old man on the shoulder. "Well, let's go," he whistled. "We should finish the floor today." The first part of the treasure Frank sold was worth almost $10,000. With that money, Theodora renovated the house, put a stove in Joel's room, and bought a lot of different things for herself and the children. "There's something I wanted to say," Frank said to her as they were returning from town with the shopping. "I don't want you to think anything bad." He turned away embarrassed and pretended to look for something in the glove compartment. "Since you're divorced," Frank grimaced as if he'd drunk lemon juice. "Well, maybe we'll..." Get married? Is that what you're saying? Dora finished it for him. Well, that's what you would say. Frank almost choked with the shame that came over him. He clutched at the steering wheel and blushed. Dora, noticing his embarrassment, put her arm around Frank. I agree. She smiled. After the wedding, Frank sold some more of the treasure that Joel had found, and he and Dora decided to open a small farm with the proceeds. Frank bought ducks, chickens, and turkeys, built pens for them with Joel, and hired some helpers. The old man became something like a manager. He kept track of each bird, monitored their health, and evaluated the work of the hired workers. Such a businessman he became. Frank grinned, looking at him. Yes, I'm not idle like you, the old man countered, also with a smile, and a businesslike look approached the carriage with 3 sons of Dora standing nearby, gently rocking it. And he sang softly some lullaby as old as himself.